By 21, she owned a home.
Has her future ripped away.
This was a particularly brutal attack.
They stabbed her multiple times on that road.
This would have been a horrifying death.
Police discover unwanted admirers prone to violence.
He was covered in blood and had blood in his hair.
And always carrying a knife.
He was jealous and said that he'd kill her.
But the evidence leads nowhere.
The investigation is getting older and older and harder to solve.
I didn't think we were going to get an answer for this case.
Until a surprise breakthrough.
I was beyond excited. I actually shouted, "Oh my God," at my desk.
Points to a killer off the radar.
Right away, I'm like, who's that guy?
Why? Why did someone do this?
People said, oh, no, he wouldn't kill anybody. But he had this pretend life.
He had no criminal record. He did not emerge as a likely suspect at all.
This is to live in America.
I grew up in Germantown. It's, a small community. I would ride my bike to the store for my mom. It was not someplace that you were afraid of.
Germantown is a small town near Milwaukee, a lot of farmland, a lot of open spaces, just a lot of dairy farming, some factories, and homes.
But on May 28th, 1999, this bedroom community wakes to a horrific crime.
Yeah, we're having a body up here on Upper River Lane. There's a green car there, green Pontiac car. She's laying on the curb. There's blood on the road.
I got a phone call that there was a suspected homicide in the industrial park. I immediately went to the crime scene. I saw a vehicle on the side of the road facing west, a large amount of blood in the roadway. I observed what appeared to be footwear impressions in blood. I saw what appeared to be drag marks of blood, 2 large pools of blood, and alongside the vehicle was a female lying face down. When we rolled her over, she had a significant number of what appeared to be stab wounds on her front. She had stab wounds on both sides of her neck.
She had some blood on her hands, and we're always hoping that there's a fight so she can either scratch the attacker. So the hands were swabbed for DNA.
We proceeded with the perspective. She may have not been expecting it, and things went south very, very fast. I do believe there was rage in this case.
That usually is indicative of personal, that they know each other, and it's almost to the point of overkill.
Who was this woman who had been so savagely murdered? Investigators looked to the victim's car for answers.
The vehicle itself appeared to be parked in a reasonable manner alongside the road.
Her car keys were by her body, so she probably had them when she got out of her car and then dropped them in the fight.
The keys indicated that she willingly got out of the vehicle and talked to someone, and then the homicide occurred. The stabbing continued not only in the roadway, but on the grass at 2 different locations, and then it looked like it may have occurred alongside the vehicle.
There's blood spatter and cast off on her wheel, on her hood, on her fender, and up on her windshield.
Her purse was in the vehicle. There was $200 in her purse.
This was not a robbery. This was something else.
After finding a driver's license, police determine the victim is 22-year-old Teresa Wesolowski.
Out on the road, there was tire acceleration marks leading away from the pool of blood in the roadway, as if you put your foot on the accelerator and peeled out, confirming to us that there was another vehicle in front of her where she was more than likely stabbed.
Police comb the crime scene, but no murder weapon is found. As detectives try to make sense of what happened to Teresa, her lifelong best friend Michelle gets a call.
Terry's brother called, and it was early. Not that it was out of the ordinary, because we were all so close. And so I answered, and he's like, "Michelle, Terry never came home last night. Well, I'm going to start calling police departments." And Germantown said, "We have her name on file." you'll have to come and speak to a detective.
Michelle and Teresa's brother rushed to the station. They had last seen Teresa the day before when she left for work.
I'll never forget, the officer was in front of me. And I said, "Where is she?" And he said, "I'm sorry, she's gone." And I just remember screaming, "Someone just told me my friend is gone. What does gone mean?"
Born in Germantown, Wisconsin, Teresa Wesolowski grew up an outgoing girl with a magnetic personality.
Everyone was friends with Terry. We became best friends in 6th grade. And then from that moment on, we were inseparable. We were sisters. There were not many people that called her Teresa. She was always Terry. I think the only time that I remember her being called Teresa was when her mom was mad. When we had done something wrong. It was always just her and I on the playground. I mean, we were just always, I want to say, running the neighborhood, you know? I can't remember a weekend that I wasn't at her house.
As she got older, Teresa was fiercely independent, buying a car at 16 and moving out on her own at 18.
She was working at Cousins Subs in Mequon, and she would go there at 7 a.m. and she would get done by 1, and she would head over to Stone Container, and she would work till 11 o'clock at night.
Despite a heavy work schedule, Teresa loved to be social.
Oh, Terry was fun. You know, Terry liked attention, and she definitely liked the attention from men. Men just seemed more attracted to her. She was young, she was beautiful. Any guy would have wanted that.
How then did someone so driven and well-liked meet such a horrible fate?
Young female, you know, at the beginning of her life, getting things together, and it's ended.
Back at the station, investigators reach out to Teresa's family and friends to piece together the hours leading up to her death.
Her shift ended at 11, and the last that anybody saw of her that we know of was that she got into her vehicle and left that parking lot.
During the interviews, detectives get their first tip.
That morning, the officers received a contact from somebody at the Department of Public Works. They had a channel on the same radio system that the police department was on, so they would know that the homicide occurred. They indicated that somebody driving a truck pulled into the parking lot. An individual got out, and they said that he was covered in blood and had blood in his hair.
Is this man somehow connected to the crime scene? Detectives head over to interview the witnesses, who tell police they'd never seen the man before.
We were told the truck driver asked if there was a hospital nearby, and then he indicated now he'd just clean up in the bathroom, which he did, and then left.
It's very common that the person who's doing the attacking gets stabbed too or cuts himself, especially if there's a struggle. Now we had a suspect, a viable suspect, and now we needed to find that person to figure out what happened.
Coming up, detectives uncover suspects with violent tendencies.
He said he can cut people like paper. He could become abusive and violent.
And untangle a web of deception.
Well, he was never married. He didn't have any kids.
He said, "I don't want to be a snitch."
Leading them to a suspect they never imagined. We
really felt that we had turned the corner on this case.
It was almost surreal. It got me because it wasn't anyone I knew.
Hours after finding Teresa Wesolowski stabbed to death at the side of the road, police search for a man seen covered in blood at a nearby public works building.
We had a very good police artist. He did a sketch of the individual based on the statements from the witnesses, put the word out there into the community.
While police wait for leads on the bloody man, they shift their attention to Teresa's home to look for clues.
I went down to Teresa's house. We made a search of the residence. I checked the shoes in the residence against the footwear impression at the crime scene, and none of them matched. So the footwear impression at the scene weren't Teresa's.
Investigators talked to Teresa's family and friends, hoping to learn more about her. They learned she was dating someone named Charlie.
Charlie was a young man who didn't hold down a lot of jobs very well. He was staying at his parents' house. They had been dating for a few months prior to her homicide.
We had known Charlie since grade school. We grew up with Charlie. He was 3 years older than us.
We had some people that we interviewed that said they fought a lot or she wanted to break up with him.
I didn't think Charlie was good for anyone. In Terry's mind, he was temporary.
A couple of weeks before her homicide, we found out that he borrowed her car while she was at work and failed to pick her up. She walked to the tavern, and then they got in a bit of an argument, and she finally said enough is enough.
Friends worried how Charlie might react to Teresa moving on.
Some of the people indicated that Teresa told them this boyfriend was jealous and said that if he caught her going out with somebody else, he'd kill her.
He said, give me 2 weeks and you won't have your friend anymore. You're like, what do you mean I won't have my friend?
So that it raises a flag that we have to determine if it got worse after that or was it just a one evening spat.
You know, stabbing is very personal. That usually is indicative that they know each other.
Why did someone do this? What did she do that was so bad that someone had to stab her repeatedly in this crime of passion?
Police immediately bring Charlie in for questioning.
Charlie was very nervous and seemed to act like he didn't really want to be there.
When police ask Charlie where he was the night of the murder, he says he was home.
He lived in the basement of his parents' house, and he was alibied by his mother. I remember the mother claiming there's no way he could get out of this house without me hearing it.
However, he slept in the basement, which the patio door opens up from the basement outside, so he could leave the house without his parents knowing. At times, Teresa got off of work at 11 at night, and she's found in the morning at 5 or 6 o'clock. So his alibi has weaknesses. It's not airtight.
Could Charlie have snuck out, driven to see Teresa, and murdered her?
Did Charlie have access to a car? He borrowed cars from people a lot. So could he have had a car that night? Yeah, he could have. The homicide's probably less than 5 miles from his house.
Police look to the tire track evidence.
The tire tracks at the scene were measured and documented. I made contact with the Michigan State Police, who have a database of vehicles. They came back with a list of vehicles based on manufacturer specifications that could have created that. And it's quite a large list.
While detectives continue to investigate Charlie, they also turn to the box factory where Teresa worked.
Whenever you have a homicide like this and it's right down the road from where she worked, obviously your biggest pool of suspects has to be the guys she worked with. There was a fair number of men that were interested in her, and there were some that, had dated her. There were some that wanted to date her.
It wasn't like she was going out and dating them. She just liked hanging out with them.
So we went to the factory to determine who had contact with Teresa, and is there anything that stands out and points to any particular individual as possibly having done this.
We interviewed one of her co-workers named Mark Lebecki. Mark Lebecki worked the same shift as Teresa.
Mark was known as a soft-spoken but well-liked guy at the factory.
He's a very quiet individual, very reserved. Most people would describe him as very mellow.
Working just a few machines away from each other, Mark and Teresa had become close.
He talked to her at work. He was a nice, likable person.
And it got to the point where they developed kind of a friendship.
Unlike the men at the factory who wanted to date Teresa, Mark preferred sharing stories about his family.
Mark Lebecki told Teresa that he had a couple kids and he kept photos of them in his wallet. He would show them to Teresa, saying, "These are my kids."
He talked to her enough to create a relationship that she felt the need to go and talk to him when he needed a friend.
Mark tells police he is saddened by Teresa's death. He also remembers something was off with her the night she died.
He indicated that he saw her that night of the homicide and commented that it looked like she was having a bad day, and she said, yeah, something was jamming in her machine.
She just laughed it off and moved on.
Having no reason to question Mark further, police turned to coworkers with a less amicable relationship with Teresa.
There were some statements from individuals that they observed her having an argument with somebody by the vehicle before the night of the homicide.
The man Teresa was arguing with is identified as her coworker, Isaac Alvarez. When police dig into his background, they find some troubling details.
Isaac Alvarez was just a little bit weird, and he always carried a knife.
At one point, he was upset with a coworker, and he said, I'm going to cut that cracker, or I'm going to knife that bitch. He told somebody else that, he can cut people like paper.
His comments about cutting up a supervisor, those are the comments that we heard, and those are the comments that kept our interest in him.
To find out more, police look into Isaac's personal life.
His ex-wife indicated that he did have a knife he always kept on his belt, and she indicated that he could become abusive and violent after one drink.
Police bring in Isaac to shed light on his relationship with Teresa and why they were arguing at work.
And in talking to him about Teresa, you could see the emotion coming out of him. This was very stressful for him. That's also the type of stressor that might cause somebody to commit a homicide.
Then, Isaac reveals something else.
He did ask Teresa if she wanted to meet him for a drink, and Teresa, being who Teresa was, she didn't say, no way. She said, well, we'll see. He shows up and she's not there. Is that rejection?
Had Teresa's rejection sent Isaac into a murderous rage?
We asked Isaac to take a polygraph. Because of Isaac's strange behaviors, outbursts, maybe prone to violence, and
But Teresa Wesolowski, police focus on her coworkers.
She's working in a factory populated by mostly men. That sets up a scenario where you're going to have people trying to ask her out. She was outgoing and she was friendly, so people could perceive that as being led on, where in fact she was probably just being nice.
She always tried to let him down easy. She would always be like, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings. She just wanted to make sure that they still wanted to be her friend.
At the police station, investigators interview one of those workers, Isaac Alvarez. Witnesses saw Isaac argue with Teresa before the night of her death.
Isaac's alibi, when he was interviewed, he was home. He lives with a 50-plus-year-old lady. His story was he went to bed at 9 o'clock, and he may have had a conversation with her when she came home, but he doesn't recall. She says she had a conversation with him 11:15, 11:30 at night, and she thought it was around 1 o'clock when he went to bed. It's a little different than his story. Well, in his case, is that person willing to lie for you? We don't know. So that's not an airtight alibi.
Police convince Isaac to take a polygraph.
he was somewhat deceptive and not answering the questions in the proper manner. And so we believe that he was trying to skew the results of the polygraph.
You couldn't get a good answer from him.
So because of that, it was ruled inconclusive.
Without any hard evidence, police can't charge Isaac for the crime. While detectives look for more leads, Teresa's autopsy report arrives.
Based on the injury patterns, the attack was a surprise attack because we did not see a significant amount of defensive type injuries. And then she was pinned in a prone or face down position. I individually identified and labeled 47 separate stab wounds. This would have been a horrifying death for any individual.
As police review evidence, they follow up on the lead on the bloody man from the Department of Public Works.
They had a sketch made of this unknown person that stopped at the garage to wash up.
We put it out there. The individual didn't come forward. It was out in the press. It was in the newspaper. I did go back and re-interview the witnesses, but nothing came back of evidentiary value.
Police also continue interviewing Teresa's friends.
I always protected Terry. So when she was killed, I had no purpose anymore. And so I gave my all to whatever they needed. It was hours and hours and hours of interviews with the police, trying to give them everything that I knew about every person we had ever hung out with, for me to help them to hopefully find who did this.
One of the people detectives learn about is Jerry Kirkpatrick.
So Jerry Kirkpatrick was a delivery guy to Cousins where Teresa worked.
Friends say Jerry asked Teresa out numerous times.
I don't think she was looking to have a relationship with him. He was definitely interested in her.
That's the indication that we got, that he was pursuing her more than she was pursuing him.
Police learn about one encounter with Jerry that left Teresa unsettled.
I thought I saw Jerry before she died at the club, just watching us. And it gave me this feeling like, why is he here? Like, he shouldn't know we're here. Why is he standing off in the shadows? It was a very creepy feeling.
So the question is Jerry stalking her?
But then, Teresa's friends point out something else disturbing about Jerry.
They thought he might be similar to the picture of the person that was at the Department of Public Works. The drawing looked like him.
Officers immediately interview Jerry at his home. Jerry denies he is the man in the sketch. He claims he was at a bar with his stepbrother the night of Teresa's murder, then went home before midnight.
There was alibi information that was confirming of the statement. When he got home, he called for a pizza to be delivered, and that was confirmed subsequently with phone records. He let us look at his vehicle. We examined the interior or exterior. Nothing of evidentiary value was located in that examination.
Then, investigators make a startling discovery.
There were knives found at Jerry Kirkpatrick's residence.
A lot of times we'd ask people, do you have knives? And can we see those knives? Do you mind if we have them tested? A lot of times that's done for reaction. So he presents 4 or 5 knives. He did let us look at them when we were at the house. We even submitted them to the crime lab to have it analyzed.
While investigators wait for results, Jerry's landlord delivers some alarming news.
What happens within the next few days is he talks to his landlord about breaking his lease.
Jerry Kirkpatrick decided to move out of town, and that's in the midst of being interviewed and the investigation. So right away, that raises our suspicion.
Was Jerry trying to give detectives the slip? Brutal stabbing of 22-year-old Teresa Wesolowski. Detectives learned from Jerry's landlord he's about to skip town.
The landlord knew the police were talking to Jerry. We were actually notified by the Milwaukee Police Department because the landlord had thought, hey, this is odd, and called them. He says he's going to move to Tennessee. One of the aspects you look at in a homicide, is there any flight behavior after the homicide? Well, breaking your lease and moving to Tennessee might be described as flight behavior. We did confirm that he put money on a place on that Friday after the homicide.
But when investigators get the lab results back on Jerry's knives, the case takes a frustrating turn.
Nothing came back of evidentiary value.
Somebody having a collection of knives is not that uncommon, especially in Wisconsin. And the quick move that he made is something strange, but, there's nothing we can do about it. If he wants to move, he can move.
Police have one more lead to follow. Jerry's resemblance to the bloody man at the Public Works building.
He fit that description. We actually did an in-person lineup with Jerry, and he was not picked out by the individuals that observed this person driving the truck.
That person was never identified and never located.
Without any hard evidence linking Jerry to the murder, police have to let him go. Weeks go by. and investigators worry the case will grow cold.
We're doing interviews. Some people we're re-interviewing. But as time moves on, the investigation is getting older and older and harder to solve.
As the weeks turn into months, investigators doggedly work the case.
Well, I technically could have retired about 5 years before I did. A lot of it is to bring justice for the victim, but also to bring some sort of resolution or closure for the family.
The police kept telling me that it was someone close to her because of the horrific nature of it. I alienated myself from people because I just didn't know who I could or couldn't trust.
Months turn into years, but Teresa's loved ones make sure she's not forgotten.
Once a year on the date of the murder, the families would come out and hold vigils. It was a way for the family to try to say that we're still fighting to resolve this case.
But we use it as a way of seeing who is showing up and maybe more importantly, who isn't showing up.
Nothing seems out of the ordinary until 2005, 6 years after the murder, when Teresa's family notices something unusual.
Her mom had called me and said, "Did you happen to go out and leave flowers for Terry?" And I said, "No, I didn't."
These arrangements showed up, and they checked around and didn't know who put them there. So that always leads you to believe, is there somebody out there that's feeling guilty about committing a homicide and leaving something on a gravesite?
We had a camera installed to see if maybe we could identify the next time somebody did something like that. But we didn't capture any image or anything.
For detectives, it's another dead end. But then, with the investigation on the brink of going cold, a new forensic technology turns this 6-year-old case red hot.
In 2005, I got a contact from the Wisconsin Crime Lab, and Patty said, "Hey, I want you to submit this list of items for us to analyze using a technique called YSTR DNA testing."
With YSTR DNA testing, it allows us to find a very small amount of Y chromosome male DNA and a very large amount of DNA from a female source. So it's like finding that single grain of salt in a large bag of sugar.
Early on, when we had the blood evidence on Teresa's hands tested, it all came back as her DNA. That's a problem because it's not giving us a lead. What happens if we strip away all the X chromosomes? If she's a female and that's all her blood, there should be nothing left.
The analyst retests the swabs of Teresa's hands for male DNA.
The first thing I did was look at the previously run DNA samples to see if there was any Y chromosome DNA present in those. All of a sudden, all the DNA types I developed on her hands are matching a known standard for male DNA. And it was incredible. I contacted Detective Yogers for samples of DNA from individuals known to be connected to the case.
And now we're going to go take DNA samples from all of our suspects. We took what was probably our 25 top suspects, nearest and dearest, ex-boyfriend, boyfriend, that type of thing. That first group was a 0.
Undeterred, investigators submit more samples.
We went back to the list and got a second group.
We were testing people that were ancillary people. We had DNA from officers at the crime scene that we used to eliminate.
I didn't think we were going to get an answer for this case.
Then, after over 40 samples, a breakthrough.
The testing came back and only one person matched the Y chromosome found mixed into the blood on Teresa's hand.
Detective Yogers called me and said, "You're not going to believe this. The last guy that I swabbed is the guy that has a positive match on that DNA."
After 7 years investigating the murder of Teresa Wesolowski, detectives have now matched DNA from the scene to one of their suspects.
I was beyond excited. I actually shouted, "Oh my God," at my desk. we had a match from the DNA on Teresa's hands to Mark Lebecki.
Right away, I'm like, who's that guy?
Mark Lebecki is a co-worker of Teresa's. Mark Lebecki was one of the individuals that was interviewed by the officers. His statement was that he and Teresa were friendly at the factory.
So the murder occurs, and Mark Lebecki kept working there and was still working there.
Before they approach Mark, detectives need more than just the DNA evidence.
Now, the other heavy lifting starts because even the DNA evidence isn't going to stand on its own. So we need to bring all these other factors into play in building a case that's sufficient for the DA to charge.
First, detectives go back to the factory to dig deeper into Mark's background.
Some people said, oh no, Mark Lebecki, he wouldn't kill anybody. He's just a puppy. He would show people pictures of little girls and he said they were his daughters. What do you think I should get him for Christmas or birthday, whatever?
When detectives look closer, they discover Mark isn't all he claims to be.
Well, he was never married. He didn't have any kids. So this is just like weird. He had this like pretend life.
Mark Lebecki was pretty much a loner, lived with his parents in a mobile home in a rural area, apparently liked to watch television, play video games.
I think it was just a big fantasy with him, a big game to try to fit in.
What else had Mark been hiding?
We had one person that said that Mark had asked her what she thought he could do to better his chances with going out with Teresa. So he clearly had a focus on her.
Detectives revisit evidence from the crime scene, starting with the bloody boot prints.
The problem with identifying somebody with a common shoe is there's so many of them. There could be millions of those shoes made. I contact a person in Scottsdale, Arizona, the detective in their forensic unit, and he had the foremost outsole databases that existed. And he said, that is a Texas steer outsole. Early in the investigation, we had information about the employees being supplied shoes or they could purchase shoes from a store.
When police search factory records, they make a crucial discovery.
And we determined that Mark Lebecki had submitted a receipt for a Texas steer shoe.
Next, investigators turn to the tire tracks left at the scene.
So we took 56 people out of our investigation and identified the vehicles that were registered to them at the time of the homicide. 5 individuals had vehicles that were able to make that mark at the scene. One of them was Mark Lebecki.
With the evidence piling up, detectives ask Mark to come down to the police department for an interview.
He was quiet. He answered the questions. He was confident, I would say.
That confidence doesn't last long.
When he finds out that his DNA is on her hands, he then starts to try and explain why they are there. What started out as I just talked to her at the door is I didn't talk to her then, I talked to her at a break, and we may have hugged.
Detectives confront Mark with the evidence.
I told him the car wheel track matches. Your DNA is found on her hands, and a boot that you wear is in the blood footwear impression on the road. So, we're looking at you. You need to start explaining some of this stuff.
Now, it's Mark's turn to drop a bombshell on police.
He said, I don't want to get anyone else in trouble. I don't want to be a snitch. Then he mentioned this guy named Tom Thompson.
Tom Thompson worked at the factory with Mark and Teresa.
At the time of the homicide, the officers that went up and did the canvass at the factory did speak with Tom Thompson. His statement to them was that he knew Teresa. He wasn't necessarily friends with Teresa. They never dated, anything like that.
Mark tells them what happened the night of the murder.
Mark said he stopped on the side of the road to buy some cocaine from Thompson.
He said that when he got up there was a vehicle already parked in front where he parked, and Tom Thompson walked up to his vehicle.
So Thompson goes in, sits in the back seat. Mark said, I am doing the cocaine in the front of the seat.
According to him, Teresa gets in the back seat and gets in an argument with Tom, and he proceeds to stab her. Mark says he only hears thumping and movement in the back seat.
Now it's time to start poking holes in the story. She cannot be stabbed 40-some times in the back seat of someone's car and they not know what's going on. The whole interior would have been covered in blood. So that's out right there.
Mark says Teresa flops out of there onto the ground. Tom Thompson continues to stab her and drags her to that location alongside the vehicle.
According to Mark, Thompson then turned on him.
Tom Thompson tell him, you keep your mouth shut, and then he let him go. So he kept his mouth shut. He didn't go to the police.
4 years later, Tom Thompson dies, but Mark keeps silent for another 3 years.
He's trying to explain how he's involved in this homicide, and the easiest thing to do is to blame it on the dead guy.
Detectives re-interview workers at the factory about Tom Thompson.
Everybody to a person said he was a health nut.
We have found no indication that he was dealing cocaine or using cocaine.
Investigators asked Teresa's friends if she used drugs.
Terry wanted nothing to do with cocaine. Nothing.
So she wouldn't have gone there to buy drugs from Tom Thompson. What was her reason for being there?
There's one last piece of evidence to examine: the car that Mark drove at the time of the murder.
We wanted that vehicle. We found it by another owner, and we ended up buying it from that guy. We brought it down to the lab and examined it for blood, hair, whatever evidence that we could. That rear seat was taken apart. It was a perforated leather, so there were holes in it. So the blood went down through the holes in that leather, and then they soaked into the foam rubber of that seat.
Does the blood belong to Teresa? It's sent to the lab for analysis.
I was very excited.
Detectives are waiting to see if blood found in the back of coworker Mark Lebecki's car belongs to her.
Those DNA profiles matched the DNA profile from Teresa Weslowski.
Oh, it was significant. It was an important moment.
But what about Mark's claim that coworker Tom Thompson killed Teresa?
At this stage, and 7 years after the murder, Lebecki is implicating a man who had died 3 years earlier, but it was only Lebecki's DNA that was ever found on Teresa's body. They find blood in a cushion of a seat in Lebecki's car. They find that that's Teresa's DNA. They have his DNA, her DNA, and at that point, the case was made.
That was the final thing that district attorney needed to issue the charge. We really felt that we had turned a corner on this case.
Detective Yogers called me and he said, I just want to let you know that we are going to make an arrest. And I was so excited. I was waiting, just waiting for the news.
Detectives go to the box factory where Mark works.
We watched for him to come out of the building, and Kim and I walked up to him and told him he was under arrest. I was excited. It was a good day.
Mark denies killing Teresa, so investigators are left to piece together what really happened that night.
I think Mark Lebicki was a very lonely person that probably imagined a relationship with Teresa and decided she was the one. She was just being nice to people. And he probably read that for more than it was.
I think for Terry, it was more that this guy was telling him his problems at work, and she was a listener. She would listen. He wore on her heartstrings and her niceness as a person.
Then, on May 28th, 1999, Mark made his move.
I think that she was coming out of the building, and Mark, for whatever reason, convinced her to meet him. They meet at the back of the vehicle.
I think that he probably did ask her to come back to his place for the night. And when she said no, he just went on a rampage and just started stabbing her. He stabbed her multiple times on that road. Then he dragged her over to that grass. He stabbed her some more. There's blood flying up on her car. He was a monster that night.
We can only guess at it because he's not talking. We don't have to prove why he did this. We just have to prove that he did.
After the vicious stabbing, Mark returned to his normal routine.
Mark Lebecki continues to work at the factory. He doesn't make any erratic move like moving away or changing jobs. He just sort of carries on with life as he did before the murder. He had no criminal record. Mark Lebecki certainly did not emerge as a likely suspect at all. It was shocking to hear that Mark Lebecki had killed Teresa.
It was almost surreal. It got me because it wasn't anyone I knew.
At trial, Mark Lebecki enters a plea of not guilty and sticks to his story that Tom Thompson killed Teresa.
Clearly, his incentive was to try and show somebody else did it back there. But that doesn't hold up.
I don't think the jury bought that at all.
Mark is convicted of first-degree murder, and in November 2010, he is sentenced to 30 years in prison with no chance of parole.
Mark Lebecki did not admit guilt. The judge noted that Lebecki never expressed any remorse.
In his mind, he's still not guilty. And the judge even said to him, I hope that someday you will admit to yourself that you've done this, because you have done this.
The journey was long and tedious. It will never replace Teresa for the family. She was a good kid. She was moving forward with her life. She probably would have maybe had grandkids. All those things are lost because of Mark.
I have pictures up of us. We had always said we would grow old together and raise our children together. My kids always ask.
Quê tôi nhớ thuở nào, tháng ngày đợi réo neo, con chim kêu chiều chiều, nghe vời vời hắt hiu, câu hò sâu lắng ru đời tình nghĩa nặng, ơi hò ơi hò. Thương sao khi hạ về, nắng lửa đổ khô cây, riêng hai đêm càng dài, mưa dầm ngọn héo mây, từng luống đất cay, từng ước nguyện người ươm đất niềm yêu đời, bữa cơm vui đất nuôi. Châu mặn mà nghĩa phu thế, chớ phụ câu thề. Ai đi không hẹn về, sao đậm tình hai quê, bên ni những nguyện thề, có chạnh lòng bên tế. Sâu nặng hay nhạt phai trong lòng, bên đây chân trời rộng, sức trẻ dài đôi chân, bên đây bao cảnh đời. nhận lòng bão dung. Mưa nắng quê người vẫn sâu nặng, niềm tin yêu trong cõi đời tựa sao mãi nơi chân trời. Mà nghĩa phu thế chớ phụ câu thề. Ai đi không hẹn về, sao đậm tình hai quê. Bên ni những nguyện thề, có chạnh lòng bên tế. Sâu nặng hay nhạt phai trong lòng. Bên đây chân trời rộng, sức trẻ dài đôi chân. Bên đây bao cảnh đời, cảm nhận lòng bão dung. Mưa nắng quê người vẫn sâu nặng, niềm tin yêu trong cõi đời tựa sao mãi nơi chân trời. Niềm tin yêu trong cõi đời tựa sao mãi nơi chân trời.